Now that we've gotten a background of what consumer experience is, consumer experience, customer experience, CX for short term, not to be confused with UX, which is a subcomponent of CX. UX would be the user experience, which would be a subcomponent of CX, which is consumer or customer experience. Let's look at the various process areas within the consumer experience, and we've segmented these into specific domains. And that first domain that we're going to look at is the process domain. First, the process framework is foundational. Process within an organization is usually defined at the executive level. Therefore, organizational processes establish the vision for the organization, and the vision is the root of all things that an organization begets, including its consumer experience. So, when you look at the process domain within the consumer experience, think of the corporate headquarters, think of executive level management. That's where your strategic vision and planning is going to come about. Those individuals who are strategically placing the organization, whether it be short term or long term, and those individuals that have the power to allocate those resources to specific processes within the organization. That's what the process area is. It is basically the headquarters. It is basically your executive level management, because they're the ones positioning the organization either to be a competitive in the market or non-competitive. They're the ones driving the culture of the organization. When executives at the headquarters are developing processes, they have to determine the scope of the processes they're implementing. Scope decisions have a big impact on CX, as scope determines what an organization is going to provide and what an organization is not going to provide. So scope is directly related to the resources that the company has at its disposal and the values and principles that the company chooses to adopt. And so that's also very important, because not only is the process domain foundational, it is also scope based. So when you're developing your organization, you are sitting there saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're about. In addition to the products and services that we're offering, this is the scope of those products. This is the scope of those services. And not only that, this is the scope of the support that we're offering. We are going to do this. We are going to do that. But just as important, you're going to say, no, we're not going to do this, or we're not going to do that. At some point, a company has to draw the line, because you don't want to provide inconsistencies within your organization. And you also want to make sure that you are aligned with the resources that you have. You don't want to overextend yourself. So you do have to draw boundaries to what you can and cannot do. They have to align with the resources that you are going to put into place. And when you look at the structure, the consumer experience is impacted based on how an organization chooses to define their organizational departments, be it intentional or be it via errors and omissions to the structure. If an organization isn't structured properly or omits roles and divisions within its structure, that can affect your consumer experience. And an example of this could be an organization's structure on consumer experience could be an organization that does not create a tech support division, or doesn't create a tiered tech support division, such as having level 0 support, which is self-help. Let's just say when you go to a website, if you have questions or concerns about a product or a service that you're getting, sometimes you'll see that first initial help is basically some questions that have been the organization has identified quick hit solutions that users can implement themselves, and that will probably be one tiered level. And then if that doesn't solve your problem, then the next tier would be to contact the help desk. And if the help desk can't support your problem or resolve your problem, then they elevate it up to a desktop support. So if an organization fails to kind of do certain things, position themselves in a specific manner, and you can't support these needs, whether they be technological or whether they be through a brick and mortar, you can be setting yourself up for to have a deficient consumer experience. The structure also involves the allocation of not only people, but finances, raw materials, technology, and even third-party vendor services to support the roles of the organization. Again, just like with structure, any errors and omissions to allocation of resources can have a negative impact on your consumer experience, or CX. Also, the structure is where the organization would define the types of talent and resources that the organization should acquire. If a business doesn't hire good employees or chooses not to invest in quality resources, your consumer experience could be impacted. So again, when we're talking about the structure of the organization, when you're setting up at the process level, these are things that the organization is doing intentionally. You're dreaming up what your business or what your vision is going to be, but you may omit some things or overlook some things, and it may be intentional or it may not. It just may be due to a lack of foresight or just a lack of having the proper skill to develop your foundational processes. And whether you intended to do it or not, but these errors and omissions can cost you your consumer experience. And it will impact your customers, and it will show up in the feedback that you receive from your customers. So, and then finally, your process dictates the culture of your organization, because it is the executives and at the headquarters level that determine what values and virtues, if any, an organization is going to have. If an organization doesn't foster a culture of delivering excellent service or instilling the idea of extending manners and goodwill towards colleagues and clients, then your consumer experience could fail. And examples of companies that have created a culture that fosters a great CX environment would be something like the Ritz-Carlton. There are many stories, at least that I've heard of how they go above and beyond for their guests. They're willing to get their guests anything and at any time. And, even though Starbucks had, their gaffe when they had the black patrons come in, and the black patrons said that they were waiting before they placed their order. They said that they were waiting on some other people to show up so that they could have their meeting. And the Starbucks employee called the police on them, and it just created kind of an uproar. Even though they had that one gaffe, Starbucks still showed that they were committed to correcting or at least mitigating such future behavior within their organization, because they said our culture isn't about that. So they shut down their stores for a day. And they did this, you think about the monies that was lost, from Starbucks doing this in the short term, but in the long term, they're playing a long-term strategic game, because they said, look, we're going to shut our stores down nationwide, and we're going to make sure that we retrain up our employees on how to handle this situation, because maybe they've never encountered that situation before. And then that's when you say, although we've had our processes in place, now we've encountered a new scenario. We need to strategically develop new policy, and we're going to shut our stores down for a day. So we're going to update our policies and ensure that our employees know what our processes and values and beliefs or business rules are when dealing with certain situations. So again, even though it was a negative blurb that Starbucks faced, they still was able to, in my personal opinion, it is a good example of how to handle a situation and to try to reinforce your corporate values. And this again are all the corporate level, showing and establishing a foundation for how their organization is going to operate. And once you establish the foundation for how your organization is going to operate, this is going to also extend to those other domain or process areas within the consumer experience, those other phases, and it's going to ultimately reach the consumer. And then that's where you're going to see your either positive or negative feedback. Now let's talk internal processes versus external processes. So you have internal processes and you have external processes, right? The definition of an internal process would be procedures and rules that directly impact only the resources of a business. So they're only impacting either your employees or the technology that you have. The consumer or the vendor never really directly sees this, right? They're either the machines that go into making the product, or maybe it's your marketing department, human resources department, payroll department. They're the support departments, right? So those would be the internal processes of your business. And then you can look at the definition of the external processes being the procedures and rules that directly impact the consumers of an organization. And an example of an external process would be, or processes would be, the manner in which people purchase their goods, the way an organization interacts with the employees. It could be either, your cashier, the interactions at the cash register, the checkout process. It could be during, a layaway process or a return process, or it could be during a consumer support process. So an organization could have several processes for this. You could have a process for online purchases for delivery to their home. You could have a process for online purchases for pickup in a nearby store, or you could have a process for in-store purchases and one for store layaway purchases and so forth. So you could have hundreds of different types of processes, or numerous different types of processes within an organization. So now let me just ask this question. Can you think of a scenario, if any, where an organization's internal processes have an effect on the consumer experience? And if you can, describe the scenario and the impact. I'm going to let you, if you want to, you can pause right now, because I'm going to throw out my supposition on that. So, and I'm going to give my supposition. If you want to hit the pause button, you can do this so now, because I'm going to give my supposition in 3, 2, 1. So I'll go ahead and give it. My scenario would be, there's a breakdown in the payroll process. So an employee works, let's just say they work in a store and they directly interact with the customers, and that employee doesn't get paid, and they need their paycheck on time so they can pay their bills, take care of their family, or just have money to go out for the night and party. That internal process that failed, that payroll breakdown, even though that's an internal process that does not affect the customer, it affects your employee. And your employee that directly interacts with the customer is probably could possibly, depending upon what their situation is, they could possibly have a negative reaction, and that negative reaction to them not getting paid spill over to their interaction with the customer. So, as a result, that employee spends all of their time trying to resolve their paycheck as opposed to trying to help out customers. Or their attitude and disposition becomes negative due to their paycheck status. Thus, a lot of potential customers and actual customers have a negative experience with the brand. So your internal processes, and this is why I'm saying the foundational level is very important, because your internal processes and having your internal processes align right, even though you think that no, it doesn't affect the consumer, it actually does. It has an impact on your consumer experience process. And this is why it also needs to be tracked. You can't just track things from the customer service perspective after the purchase or during the purchase. You need to look at the whole entire process, especially if you plan on implementing data analytics. And that's also another thing we can talk about, because this stuff all impacts consumer experience. Everything does. So if your organization, again, going back to the previous topic that we just talked about a few minutes ago, if your organization fails to, whether consciously or not, or subconsciously, if you just fail to put together, let's just say, routine training to say our organization needs to have a training policy on how we're going to handle or acknowledge diversity within our organization. If your organization fails to have a policy on sexual harassment in the workplace or workplace diversity, on or how to deal with employees with special needs, or just having various reinstilling your corporate culture and saying, you know what, we're going to make our employees every 6 months or once a year or however long on whatever type of cycle go through repetitive training. If you don't reinforce your brand, then that's where the problems break down within your organization. So if you don't have these internal processes taken care of, whether it be your payroll system, and you can have various scenarios where you ensure that, okay, if we have a payroll breakdown, how are we going to handle that? How are we going to keep our employees satisfied so that they can do their job properly, maintain our brand, but at the same time we get them paid? These are things that you need to think about so that your brand is always protected in your service, and that your products and that the consumer experience, because that's ultimately what it's about. It's about your customers feeling good, feeling happy about, working with you and collaborating with your organization and supporting your organization. This is why the internal processes as well as the external processes are very, very important. Now, what can companies do to create a process domain that builds the foundation of a consumer experience that effectively aligns with the organization's business objectives? Well, the organization can implement some or all of these techniques. They can do some personification activities. They can do some modeling, and that's modeling of not only the brick and mortar stores, but also of their online store, the logistics of the business process. They can also do some modeling of the organizational processes themselves. They can do some benchmarking or quantifying some of the metrics of their organization. So it's some examples, just in case if you're not familiar with benchmarking. Just a quick example would be like, what are the acceptable turnaround times between an order and a shipment of whatever product it is, or acceptable customer ratings. You can do some benchmarking techniques such as that, or acceptable missed defects on a production line if you have that type of business. You could do some management activities. So develop some risk scenarios and devise mitigation strategies. You can do some prioritization. Prioritize all of the information that you're capturing within your business, your expected consumer experience achievements or values, and prioritize those, because again, remember, you're only going to have limited resources, and you have to figure out how can you allocate which resources are important so that you can allocate funds to that. You're going to do some alignment activities, and that's alignment of resources, which is money, manpower, and technology. Again, that kind of accompanies with your prioritization. And then you definitely want to do some documentation. What's your code of conduct? What are the standard operating procedures? What training classes, if any, are you going to offer internally? What's your mission statement? What are the ethics documents? What are any supporting documents that you're going to have within your organization to maybe provide your employees some help or counseling in regards to diversity, or maybe if they have substance abuse issues, you can capture documentation, because all of this stuff, it may seem like it doesn't impact the consumer experience, but it actually does. For example, if you have an employee that has, maybe some type of substance abuse problem or some type of gambling problem, offering that help internally. The reason why organizations do that, not only because organizations care about their employees, because that's probably the main reason why organizations do it, but it's also to help you get some assistance so that not only can you do your job effectively, and that they don't have to, go through that whole process of that whole learning curve of retraining somebody else up, and therefore which impacts the consumer experience, but it also because you're a valued employee and they don't want to lose that skill set or see your skill sets diminish. So if they can help mitigate any personal issues that you may have, whether it be financial issues, and they can help provide some kind of financial coaching internally, or if you're having problems going through a hardship in your personal life, and they can offer counseling on the job, that helps you and relieve you. So that's one less thing you have to worry about, and you can come into work being effective. So these are things that you need to think about if you're implementing processes within your organizations that help the consumer experience. So now let's just talk about personification real quick. Personification is really, it's looking at the definition, it's just the attribution of distinct characteristics to someone or something. So personification is a high level exercise of qualifying people, places, or things. So you can provide a personification to anything, whether it's a business, the actual business entity, or you can provide a personification to a person. So one of the techniques that you would do in personification in the consumer experience, you could say, first, you could start internally. You can say, well, what type of business do we want to be? What type of attributes? Let's just kind of create a fictitious, or let's just dream up. You're dreaming, right? Let's dream up a business. What kind of environment would we want it to be? We would want it to be, maybe, and it could also be a real business that you're looking at too as well. But you could say, we want it to be a fun-loving environment. Again, that qualifying word, you're providing an attribution, fun-loving. We want to be a fun-loving organization where people can come in and feel free to be themselves. People can express themselves in certain ways. The people, we're not stifling people's creativity. Management cares about others, and everyone cares about each other. And, we all just get along, and, you can kind of just dream up this fictitious scenario. You come into the office building, and, there's, every morning we're offering different treats for employees to eat, and we're creating a family environment, and we're all hanging out on Wednesdays. That's a personification. You're personifying your business. You're kind of creating this idea of what you want the organization to be. And then once you start dreaming up that vision, then you can, once you have those attributions of, or that kind of visual of what you want your business to be, and you've kind of created that persona, then you can start saying, well, how are we going to get there? How as an organization are we going to get there? And then that's when you take the personification activity to a different level, and then you can start providing some more detail, and you can start building your documentation or even your layout for your organization of how you're going to say, okay, well, in order for us to get there, our cafeteria needs to be this size, or it needs to be positioned over here. And then also we need to have specific breakout rooms, and the breakout rooms should, or we're going to eliminate cubicles, and it's going to be an open area where we can all sit and converse with one another. And, management's not going to have offices. We're all going to be able to see each other and touch each other and just have a great time. And that's where your persona is going, because now you're trying to say, now we've got this vision of where the type of organization we want to be. Now we need to build out the space that aligns with that vision. And then we need to build out the type of personalities that fit inside. These are the type of people that we want to hire. They're going to fit that type of personality that goes into that business. Now, similarly, you've had that conversation about the business. Now you can take that persona to a different level. You can talk about that persona in relation to your customers. So now your personification is going to allow your organization to identify its consumer base. So by doing so, enterprises can build their consumer experience logistics around their target client base. And additionally, organizations can effectively mine, elicit, and analyze data from the respective consumer group to continually evolve their customer base efforts, your processes, your products, your services, and interactions to align with that consumer base. I know I said a lot, so let me just slow down and kind of break that down a little bit. Hopefully people understood that. And if you did not, hopefully I can clarify that. You can look at it and say this: we've kind of developed a persona for our organization. Now let's look at our customer. Who's the ideal customer that we want to attract? So now you can build out a persona about that. So let's just say you just had this company, whatever type of company it is, and you can say, okay, well, we have a company here, and whether it's a moving company, and you can say, well, what type of customers, who's our ideal customer? And you may say our ideal customer is, and again, let me just say this before I go on, and You don't want to talk about things that are going to get you in trouble from a federal or from violation of any person's amendments, such as you don't want to start getting into, when you're developing a persona, getting into race or even gender may come up, but you don't want to start excluding people. But you may say the ideal person is probably going to be this, but you kind of want to steer away from kind of like your race, sexual orientation, disability, religious affiliations, and so forth. Just kind of create a persona that says, well, we may have this financial status is okay. You may say, well, the person that's going to purchase our goods, because we're this high-end retail store, or we're trying to be this high-end boutique, it's probably going to be somebody in this socioeconomic class, or they make about this type of money. Maybe they're a tree hugger, they drive a Prius and they care about the environment. So they're buying our eco-friendly handbags and our recyclable clothing. I don't know, whatever type of business that you do, but your clothes are very high end, and you're saying that that's the ideal customer. And that ideal customer, they don't like to wait for things. Our ideal customer, they like things and they want it immediately given to them. They like instant gratification. They don't like to wait. They're very demanding. And so once you start building that persona of that customer, then you can say, okay, well, the type of people that we need to work to cater to this person, they're going to have this type of personality. They're going to have to be very catering to that person's personality. They're going to have to wait on that person, or they're going to have high-end etiquette, know how to interact, and they know how to cater to this person's ego, or they know how to wait on this type of person. They don't try to oversell them, but they don't hover around them, but they know how to, kind of make themselves not seen, but they're paying attention to this person. When this person calls them, they're there to pick up their goods and services, ring them up, or our stores need to be laid out where we're offering, maybe some free juice and we're serving it in nice glasses. So, and that would be your ideal customer. And then you may say, well, now that we've kind of identified our ideal customer, let's look at what our secondary customer would look like, because you're always going to have a spillover customer. You're going to have a target group, that ideal customer. That's your target group. But then you may also say, well, now we have this other customer base. So these individuals come into our store and they shop here too. They may not be regular shoppers. They may not be dedicated to the brand, but they shop here and we don't mind them coming here. We'll service them as well. And so then you build out that persona. Now, and I've mentioned those two, but then you're also going to have a third class, and you may decide to say, well, let's look at the interloper. That's the intruder, the person that, we really don't cater to this type of person. And I'm not trying to be mean here, but you really have to think about it. And I'm not trying to say your business may have an interloper, an intruder, a person that you really don't want to cater to. But there are some businesses or instances where you may have to say, look, these people really, I don't know if we want this type of person in our business. I don't think that this is the type of person that we want to service. So I can give you an example. Let's just say you may have a customer. Let's just say you dealing in a retail space, and you may have that one customer. They always come and purchase something, and then they always bringing something back and complaining. They come into your store. Let's just say you have a brick and mortar store. They come in and they want to be waited on hand and foot. And this could be a rich person. It could be, I don't know what their socioeconomic status is, but they can come in and for whatever reason, whatever type of store you have, they can afford your goods or services. But they come in and there's so much of a hassle to deal with. They always want you to wait on them hand and foot. You have other customers in the store. You don't have the manpower to hire that's going to satisfy everybody in that, to satisfy all of the other customers. But this person just demands a lot of time, a lot of attention. It takes them 30 and 40 and 50 minutes to make up their mind on what they want to purchase, if they purchase anything at all. They continually come into the store and they asking a bunch of questions, and then they turn around and they just leave without purchasing anything, or they purchase it and then 2 days later or the next day they bring everything back, and then they want to complain and they want to say they need to talk to headquarters. These would be a person you have to determine and say, well, no, this person is acceptable. You may say that this is an acceptable person, but as a business, you may also say, well, this is not the type of customer that we want. These are the interlopers. Now you have to come up, once you've developed that persona of what that person would look like, you also have to say, well, how do we deal with this? Because you also have to handle that in a respectful manner. You are running a business, and your business should be opening and catering to people. But then you have to say, okay, well, what are the rules and regulations in whichever country that you're operating in? Because you want to make sure that you're in compliance with the law, that you're not, discriminating against someone, against whether it be on a, based on sexual preference, whether it be based on their religious affiliations, race, gender, and so forth. But if this person is just there, if there's a way that you're saying, no, this person is just being a jerk and we just don't want to deal with them, we don't have the time or attention to deal with this or the resources, then you need to devise a plan to say, how are we going to handle the interlopers? Because not all customers are good customers. Not all money is good money. Some money, to have to work that hard for that type of money, is it worth it? So you could come up with a plan that says, well, you know what? We're just going to refer this person to, our competitor business. And not you're doing it in a malicious way, but you're saying, let's just try to refer this person to another business that can probably best suit their needs. And we tell them in a respectful manner that says, sir, unfortunately, we cannot, or ma'am, unfortunately, we cannot be of assistance. And I think that, we have some alternatives. May we suggest that you try X, Y, and Z organization. They can probably better suit you. You need to devise a plan that comes up to deal with an interloper to your business. And that is what personification is about. It's just about, identifying the attributes of a company that you want to be, what attributes fit you as an organization, but then also what attributes fit your consumers, your client base that you're focusing on. Now, pay attention to when you're talking about personification, because personification helps you to focus on your product's target audience. So once you've identified your ideal customers and also the individuals to whom you do not wish to target, then you can better understand what metrics you need to capture and whose feedback you are concerned with. See, note, you must follow all country and state guidelines regarding discrimination laws. Again, I'm going to hit on that. We're not advocating discrimination, based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and so forth. So all individuals should be welcome to purchase your goods and services based on the legal statutes governing your business. But you as an organization have the right to say, well, some people, if people are going to waste our time as an organization, we can develop some metrics to say, well, let's just kindly refer those individuals, or say, this contract, if you're dealing in services, let's just say you're providing a service to maybe a bigger business, and that bigger business is being demanding of your organization or expanding the scope of the contract. Maybe it's on you, if that contract, that service level agreement was written very open-ended, maybe it's on you as an organization to say, look, we no longer can service you. Maybe that we can cut ties and you can get your services from someplace else. Because if that company is going to suck up all of your resources, or that customer is going to suck up your resources, then at some point you have to move on, because your other customers, and particularly your ideal customers, are going to suffer. And again, like what we're saying here is, because if you're establishing some type of metrics that you're gauging your performance by, and you're saying, we're basing this on our online reviews. Our online reviews, we're looking to always have a 9 out of 10. Well, whose reviews are you taking into consideration? Are you taking everyone's reviews into consideration? Or are you just only staying on target and focusing on your primary customers, your ideal customers, and your secondary customers. If you're going to roll up the interlopers into that review, then your data is skewed possibly, because now you have feedback from people that you probably really don't even care about. So that's also another thing to think about when you're looking at personification. So, and I'm just going to end this section here with just 2 quotes. One from General Colin Powell, who was an American general here in the United States. I don't know if there's any international people, but just in case you are, but it's a general in the United States. And the quote was, "Trying to get everyone to like you is a sign of mediocrity. You cannot focus on everyone, because if you try to focus on everyone, some people are going to suffer from that. Especially as a business trying to provide universal services or products. At some point, if you don't focus on the people whom you intended that are your ideal customers, and you try to satisfy everyone, even those interlopers, you're going to provide mediocre services or goods or a consumer experience, possibly to your ideal target market." Now, the other one is from the famous magician and illusionist Chris Angel. He said, "You can't please everyone, and trying to do so is the kiss of death. I don't care about Wayne Newton," and Wayne Newton's a musician. He said, "I don't care about Wayne Newton's demographics. When I do, I'll know that it's time to quit." And I think this is an even better quote, because what Chris Angel understands that, look, Wayne Newton, he's kind of making my point here. He's saying Wayne Newton is a musician. He doesn't do what I do. I am an illusionist. I'm a magician. Wayne Newton is a musician. Anytime I start to try to please his audience, I'm missing the whole point. I'm not staying on target with my customer base. I'm going to lose the people who are dedicated to me, who are following me, who understand and respect and appreciate my craft, if I start trying to venture out to cater to Wayne Newton's demographics. And that is the whole point that I'm trying to make here as well. You got to stay on target and stick to your consumer base. And just to kind of wrap that conversation up, and to further illustrate that, let's just look at this one point here. We're in the age where everything's trying to move, specifically in the automobile industry. People are trying to move to creating hybrid or totally electric cars. And 2 of the most popular cars or recognizable cars that's on the market today in the electric field are the Nissan Leaf and the Tesla. 2 electric cars. Both of them, I don't own either one. I can't recommend. I've never even been in either one. But I have been in the Leaf, so I can say I've been in the Leaf. And I've been in the Tesla on the showroom. So I've been in both of them on the showroom, but I've never driven them, never had any really experience with them. So I'm not trying to vouch for any brand, but these are they're two electric cars, but they cater to 2 different markets. If you think about it, the person who's going to buy the Tesla, if you think about the persona of a person who's going to buy a Tesla. The Tesla driver would be maybe Sean Puffy Combs. Someone who's flashy, flamboyant in the entertainment field. Someone who, cares about, status and, wealth and showing their wealth. And I don't want to prejudge Puffy Combs, because Puffy's probably a great human being. I never met him. He did go to Howard University like myself, so I definitely understand him from that perspective. But I'm just making the point that Tesla is targeted towards a specific market. It's in a different price range too, right? And then you have the Nissan Leaf here. So the Nissan Leaf is probably for your everyday, average working person. Not to put it down. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad car. I'm just trying to say that it's for a working class person, middle class person, a person that's probably low key. It could be even for a millionaire who just, because there's a lot of millionaires floating around who just don't show their wealth. They're like, I'm conservative with my money. I spend my money, on the right things. I don't have to be flashy, but I like having nice stuff. And it's like just like having stuff that serves its purpose. The functionality's there. I don't need the extra aesthetics. And so that car could be for a millionaire too, but that low key millionaire, So they service two different markets. You can get your reviews can be skewed if a person who is buying if that Tesla is marketed towards or has those interlopers come in and they come in and review the car, they buy it, that person who should be in that Nissan Leaf, if they're in that Tesla, they may give it bad reviews because they're like, as far as from a earned value management perspective, they're like, this car isn't I don't know why it's priced so high and so expensive, just for the technology that it has. So a person who shouldn't be buying that Tesla, but you give it to them anyway, they're going to mess up the reviews for that because they should have been in the Leaf. And vice versa. If you put Puffy in the Leaf, Sean Puffy Combs in the Nissan Leaf, he may say, well, this car isn't flashy enough. It's not for me. And he's going to give it negative reviews, and the car probably doesn't deserve the negative reviews, but he's not a Nissan Leaf person. Your car should be targeted to your target audience. And by putting the wrong customer with the wrong product, you're going to get bad reviews and you're going to get a bad consumer experience. So that's why you want to right size your consumers with your products. And that's why personification is important, because it helps you to do that. It helps you to devise and visualize who that customer is so that you can build your products and services accordingly. And now another technique that we can also do when we're working within our process domain to establish a great foundation for your consumer experience is to do some process modeling. And the process modeling is just a graphical or abstract layout of a person, object, or process. And so those models should address your organization, your business processes, and it can address your location, whether that be virtual or a physical brick and mortar location. And we have a few examples here. So you can see typically, if you're talking about from an organizational perspective and you're laying out an org chart, you have your more traditional org chart. As you can see, top to bottom, how they show the interactions between, from the CEO all the way down to the lower level of frontline managers. That's one form of modeling. You can see the middle graphic here. That's kind of your more evolved, showing contextually how people fit within an organization. You can do that route as well. And then there are also, you can do matrix tables where it just has roles and responsibilities, where you're just laying that out. Or you can create business rules tables that define all of the business rules within your organization and when they get implemented. Models are just good because you can immediately look at a model instead of writing out paragraphs of this person does this and this person does that. Models are something that most people can quickly look at, because I think most people, at least I am, but most people are visual people. And so if you look at a model, most people can automatically say, yeah, I get that. I understand it. I don't have to read a whole paragraph to figure out what it is you're trying to convey to me. So this is an approach that is definitely good when you're, again, trying to establish a foundation, because models are going to help you visualize what your scope is. You're laying out the scope of how you're going to handle your consumer experience. Also, too, when you're looking at models, because models can also again, as we say, you can kind of lay things out as far as list items. One approach that you can do is kind of lay out your processes, and you can do that within a model. And here we're just kind of showing you a contextual version. You can go into a meeting and you start brainstorming. You can say, well, let's look at all of the processes that we're going to have for our business. So let's just say, for one example, we're just talking about, a friend's developing their moving company or a moving company, and they're going to move furniture for individuals. Those friends can say, well, what kind of processes should we, because we want to have uniform processes. So when we work, no matter what job it is, whether it's if they're all medium-sized jobs or if they're all heavy lift jobs, we should have some kind of uniform approach, because then that allows for organizational efficiencies. The more efficient you can be with a customer, the more standard services that you can provide across the board, the more consistent your feedback should be, i.e. if you go into most of your franchise fast food chains or franchise restaurants or even franchise retail stores, they have the same repeatable processes, whether you're in Washington, D.C., or whether you're on the West Coast. You can go into most of those stores, and those processes are more than less likely going to be the same. Sometimes you may tweak your processes to a particular culture, but for the most part, the primary processes are the same. So just kind of looking here, if you have those friends and they have that moving company, what they should do, or what you should do as a business, is say, let's analyze all of the particular scenarios that can happen within a business, and let's develop processes for those. And here you can say, well, look, if we're going to be running a moving company, we're going to have to know how we're going to schedule our jobs. And here they're listing out how they're going to schedule their jobs. When a customer calls, we're going to schedule a moving assessment. We're going to assess the job and give company presentation. Okay, so if you're going to assess the job and give a company presentation, this should be a standard presentation that somebody's going to have to develop, some kind of resource that you're going to have to travel with, right? So did you get the job? If you get the job, then you're going to have to schedule the job, secure the deposit. If you don't get the job, then you're just going to thank the client for their time. You're going to leave some marketing material just in case they change their mind, or maybe you want to pass it on to some friends in the future, and then you're going to leave. But then if they do get the job, if you're at 3A, then you're going to go down to 4, right? You're going to reserve the truck. Then you may have say, well, how do we reserve the truck? Well, let's reserve the truck one day before, so we ensure that we have a truck to move. You're going to confirm the job again the day before, and then finally you're going to execute the move. But then you also got to think, well, that's just, that's customer facing. But then also, what about the actual move process? Like, how do we handle that? Then you go through that process. Then you're going to talk about payroll process, because now you're talking about how do we handle our employees internally so we keep the employees happy. And when the employees are happy, they're providing great customer service in the field. And that great customer service translates into, hopefully, a great customer experience. So that's why you have to say, hey, let's look at our payroll processes, internal process. You're going to analyze your entire business, and you're going to do it within the scope and the resources that you have. And this is one way that you could lay it out, but the particular way that I like to lay it out is like this, in a model. So you could just draw it out, and this is the modeling notation that I'm using here is the business process modeling notation, or it's just standard modeling. And it's just, you're laying out your information. You're starting at the green. If you see where the green dot or green circle is, that's just your go point. There's a trigger there, where the request comes in. So you receive a request, you schedule you do your scheduling assessment, you conduct your presentation. And then once you conduct that presentation, if the customer doesn't give you the job, which is the not so happy path, you leave your marketing materials, and then you go to the red dot, which means that everything ends for that process. But if you do get the job, you schedule the job, you secure the deposit, you reserve the truck, you confirm the job, and you complete the job. So what you should do is practice and map out all of your processes, or as many as you can. Map out the various scenarios, and not just the good ones, but the bad ones as well, because you need to know how to handle those. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, you can take this modeling approach to a different level, because this right here is just showing your processes and your activities. Well, what you could do is you could also you could map some of not only just your business rules, but your resources to particular processes. So then that way, you can now we're kind of getting a little bit past consumer experience, and we're kind of, but this still ties into consumer experience. It kind of goes into really just operating efficiencies, but the more efficient that you can operate, the better your customer experience. So I'm just going to touch on this real quick. Is a little trick that I would do, or I would recommend, is not only map out your processes, but then associate your rules, your business rules, and or resources to particular processes. So that way, you know, in the future, hey, if a process within our organization goes away or changes, I know what rules are impacted within my organization, or I know what resources. So let's just say, for example, here, we're looking again at the chart. This is the same chart, but I've just added, so in the yellow boxes are the resources. So maybe it's a spreadsheet or an app or some resource or a cash register that you use to process things. Those are your resources. But then the red boxes are your business rules. And maybe you have rules for things. So let's just look. You receive a request for work. So that request for work has two things tied to it. First, it has a business rule. So, or let's just start with the resource. So the resource is R1, and our R1 is an email account. So basically, we're saying when we receive a request, it's coming in through an email, and maybe you have a website, people fill out a form on a website, and when they hit the go button, it redirects to your company email. But it can also be to a telephone. Maybe someone calls in, so you could add another resource to say it's at R1 and then R something else for telephone call coming through. But I'm just using email account just for now. So that's your one resource tied to receive requests. But then also tied to receive requests is a business rule. So that's BR1. And then that's just saying that BR1 is saying that they must respond, which is the they is the organization, your organization that's running this moving company that we're using in our example, our capstone example, maybe for this class, is that the organization must respond to the request within 24 hours. Now, also, that's a metric that you can capture, and we're going to talk about metrics later on, because now you're going to want to start tracking, hey, how fast are we responding to these requests when they come in? Because if we're responding, we need to respond within 24 hours, and then you can start tracking that. Like, when did that request come in? When did we get back to the customer? Now you're capturing data, and you can do data analytics, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later on that information. Now you can go to schedule the assessment. That's the next task. After you receive the request, you can have rules tied there, or you may not, or you can have resources there or not. But I didn't build out a whole bunch of rules and resources, but I just wanted to show you a few. Then you could do a conductor presentation. When you conduct a presentation, you could actually have a resource here that says PowerPoint, whether it be a PowerPoint or Google Slides, some type of presentation slide based, or it could be a booklet that you guys carry, and that booklet could be company presentation packet, but it must be carried, and that's tied into that task. And then let's just say we're going down the happy path. If the customer accepts and wants you to be their moving company and they choose you, then you schedule the job. Well, how are you scheduling the job? Well, we have an R3 associated with the scheduled job task. And what is R3? R3 is some task maker app. Now, I don't know if that app exists or not. I just use that as a name. So if that's purely coincidental, if there is a task maker app, I wouldn't be surprised because there's a million apps out there. But you're just saying, okay, when we schedule jobs, we are going to put it in the task maker app. So everyone that's out there giving presentations should have that app. And then once you secure your deposit, you have a business rule tied in there. And that business rule is BR1, or really that should be a BR4. And that is they must review the contract and work with the customer. So you're basically saying that when we're securing that deposit, we need to go out and we need to review the contract and work with the customer. So you're just validating and going over the contract, because therefore you don't want any mistakes made with this, right? And then you move through the rest of the tasks. And then the final task before the job terminates is to complete the job. In the way that you complete the job, and actually really you could have a task here that's inserted in that says receive payment, but I'm just kept this high level. Let's just say it's complete job. And then how do we complete the job? We complete the job with R4 with payment. And so the resources that we have tied into job completion would be R4, and that just says PayPal. So maybe you have some type of device, a PayPal device that goes into your phone and you swipe their phone, or you use near frequency communications, NFC payments to, let people tap their phones and you take payments. But those resources are tied into your processes. And this, I think, is important because maybe you could look at your organization one day and say, well, we need to update some of our resources. And as you update resources, you update how they're tied in. And that could also change some of your processes. Or if your processes change around, you can know what resources and or business rules are impacted. Now, similar to doing scenarios and process models is risk management. And every organization should be doing risk management because not everything goes right in a business. In IT development, which is what my company Baca Strategies does, is we do a lot of Murphy's Law scenarios because typically anything that can happen will almost more than less likely happen. You don't know how many times I've been asked to go to a conference and deliver a presentation, and management used to tell me, well, we want you to do the demo live. And I used to always say, I don't know if we should do it live. Maybe we should just run it through, just have some simulated screens. No, we're going to do it live. And then when you try to do it live, the internet connection is down and you can't get to your application and run it. The servers start running slow and it takes forever for you to walk through your demo. It's always something, and it always goes wrong during the time when you don't want it to go wrong. So that's why we talk about risk management. And risk management is just the maintenance and control of harmful elements within an environment. So risk management applies to all aspects of the business, which include your people, your location, your processes, your infrastructure, technology, and your data. So that's what you want to do. You want to analyze the risk within your business. So kind of piggybacking and continuing on with the scenario that I used in the last previously a few minutes ago, talking about, friends having this moving company and they establishing a moving company. In addition to establishing their processes, they should look at some of the risks. Like, what are some of the risks of running this moving company? Well, like, what if the truck breaks down en route to the job? What do you do? How do you mitigate that risk? Like, how would you handle that? What if the truck breaks down while you're delivering the goods? What if a mover calls in sick the day of the move? The customer refuses to pay the balance of the invoice. See, all of these things you need to start looking at. What if your payroll system goes down? What if the customer is a repeat client and is a difficult customer? How are you going to handle these various scenarios? So risk management is very important because you need to come up with as many scenarios. And I'm not trying to say to spend all day and get caught in analysis paralysis, but you need to have a way to handle these situations and have a uniform way. So that way, just in case, God forbid, they come up, but if they do come up, you at least have a way to react to them. You have a mitigation plan in place. You can say, well, if a truck breaks down en route, that means we need to have a great relationship with so-and-so, the company that you do your rentals from, or maybe we need to buy our own trucks, and maybe we need to buy 2 and 3 trucks just to have as backups for redundancy. I don't know what the organization's resources, but whatever the organization's resources is, the organization needs to come up with that strategy. And then the organization needs to also do prioritization of risks. And we'll talk about that as well, because you're going to come up with a lot of different scenarios of things that you want to have as far as for a business process. You're going to come up with a lot of risks. But then the other thing that you're going to have to answer later on down the trough is, what can we pay for? What can we implement now? And what can we not implement? But these are still things that you need to think about to ensure that you do have a good consumer experience plan in place. Now we can also talk about benchmarking. So benchmarking is just the establishment of a point of reference by which something can be measured. So benchmarking is where business results are quantified. So now we're going to quantify some things, right? So in a technology-driven environment, establishment of benchmarks can help to drive data elements for an analytical consumption. And that's what I was kind of talking about. And I kind of hinted to it before in regards to when you're saying when you had that business rule that says calls had to be answered within the first 24 hours. Now you're kind of establishing, okay, well, that's kind of a benchmark. And so we want to see about that. So now the company, which you ought to start doing as well as the executives within this organization, or as at least a consumer experience expert within your organization, is saying, let's establish some benchmarks because we need to do some data analytics. And data analytics is a big business, at least here now during this day and age. Data is very important. So now we need to come up with, how we'll determine what a successful consumer experience is. Like, how will we determine that? And the best way to do that is to be able to quantify that. You can qualify some things. That'll probably take a little bit longer, but it's best to quantify those things. So how do you do that? And maybe it's also about, again, going back to our personification. Whose opinions do we value? Do we value every review we see out there online? Are we going to just track down every single review that's on all social networks? And are we going to accept those from everyone? Or maybe we say, no, we're just going to trust our own internal processes. And we know which customers are our primary target customers. We know which customers are our desired customers, and we know who the interlopers are, right? Because everyone has an interloper. That person that, you serve them because you have to serve the public. Your business cannot discriminate, but it's like, this person is just always difficult. We really not targeting this person, but this person's coming to my business anyway, and I'm going to serve them because, we are, in the business of serving everyone. So that's one of the things that you're going to have to determine. And so some of the things that you're going to have to think about is just saying, did the customer understand the terms of the agreement? And I'm kind of going back to the previous example of this moving company, right? So that moving company is saying, that could be one of the elements, or, and if they didn't, whose fault was that? Maybe that was a fault of our technician or our sales rep that went out there to, pitch when they gave the presentation. So then we need to know why they didn't understand that agreement, or, we can kind of make some inferences based on the data that we have coming back. Did the movers arrive on time? Because now you can say, well, we had this job at this particular time. Did the movers show up on time? Now, how are you going to track this information? How are you going to track did the movers arrive on time? So now you're moving into probably establishing another process that says when the job is scheduled at, a specific time, let's just say 10 o'clock, the movers have to, they have to, it's similar to some, with the postal, with the postal services do, the parcel post services do, where they have their supply chain management, and those packages are continually scanned, where you can track your package from when it first leaves a warehouse until it arrives on your doorstep. They'll let you know every stop that package makes along the way, right? That package winds up in Philadelphia, then it winds up in DC, then it winds up in Michigan, then it finally makes its way to its destination in Colorado. And most people can track their packages. Well, are we going to do the same thing as our business organization? If I'm speaking in terms of this moving company. Are we going to track to say the worker has to say when they've picked the truck up and then when they've actually arrived? Are you tracking that information? You can possibly do so. And if that's something that you want to track, now you got to determine what's the cost of adding this as a process. Were any items damaged during the move? So you can actually say that. So how are you going to track that? Are you going to have the workers do an assessment, a post move assessment with the client to see if all of the goods were okay? How approximate were movers in their move time estimates? Because initially when you're talking with your customer in this moving scenario, the customer's probably going to ask you, well, how long is it going to take you to carry the boxes out of the house and put them in the truck and deliver them to the other house? And your mover's probably estimating, well, the distance between this house and the new house is 50 miles. It's going to take us probably an hour to get the stuff in the truck. It's probably going to take us another 45 minutes in the car, and then it's going to take us another hour to put your boxes in the house. So we're going to estimate 2 hours and 40 or 50 minutes or whatever they're going to estimate. And then are you going to say we gave we gave an estimate before, and then what's our actual? Because are you tracking that to get those times down? Is that something that you actually want to track? Because again, everything that you track is going to cost your organization money. It's because it's an additional process. So you can kind of go through all of these stuff, all of these things to kind of start trying to develop some kind of benchmarks for your organization. And then what's going to come out of the information that you're trying to extract, the benchmarks that you're trying to establish, is going to be data elements, right? Because if you're going to track something, you're going to say, well, now how am I going to track that? Well, in order for me to track, were my move time estimates correct, I'm going to need estimated completion times. So I'm going to probably need some type of database or maybe an Excel spreadsheet where I'm capturing numbers. And if I'm going to use a database, then I'm going to have to use some type of database, whether it be a SQL database, which is structured query language, if anyone isn't familiar with databases, or maybe I'm just using, I'm a small business, so I'm just going to use an Access database, Microsoft Access, or I'm going to use some kind of Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, but I'm going to be capturing in, and every time a person moves someone, I'm going to capture in their estimated completion time and the actual completion time. And these are numbered fields or date fields. So I need to establish that. I need to know what type of data I'm collecting, the format of the data. I need to, did they understand the contract? Am I going to capture that as a Boolean, true, false, yes, no question? Or am I going to, how am I going to capture that? Were items damaged? Is that, that can be a yes, no, and then it could also be with items were damaged, how many? Then you can have an alpha field for that. And you can see it can go on and on. So for your organization as well, you're going to need to know, what am I going to benchmark? What do we want to capture as benchmarked information? Because again, you're going to use this for data analytics. That's the purpose of capturing information, so that you can track it and try to forecast or predict, future outcomes. And also it is to try to get better, to do for improvements, right? So that's the other thing for benchmarking. But benchmarking, I think, is very important for an organization to do. And I think a lot of organizations should be doing it, especially if you're in the customer experience realm. You're definitely going to want to track that. Again, I can't tell you how many stores I go into, and you all do it, whether it's online or whether you're in a store. I go to even fast food restaurants, and they hand you your receipt and they say, well, there's a survey on there. Tell them how I did. And that is in every store that I go to, whether it's in clothing store, home improvement stores, retail stores. Every time I purchase something, they want to know how was my experience was. And that's going to be something that you are going to probably have to implement or think about implementing when you go back into your organization. Are we going to implement that? Can we afford to implement something like that? How do we implement something like that? What resources are we going to use? And how much is this going to cost us? Anytime I call into a help desk, I always get an email, or you purchase something online, they always send you an email saying, how was my service? I take my car into service every time. They always want to know, how did we serve you? They are tracking consumer experience because consumer experience is a big thing. And these are things you don't think about consumer experience once it's in production. You think about it here at the process domain, at the process level. Headquarters is the one that's dictating and saying, we need to track that. And we're going to put money into tracking what the consumer experience is. So looking at just kind of that moving scenario, that moving company scenario that I kind of threw out there, just kind of throwing out that this is kind of what they would want to do. They would want to have that personification. They would want to devise or kind of create the attributes or values of their customer. Who is their customer? You know, is their customer a type A personality, a person that can't wait? You know, this person, they like to be treated like a queen or a king, and they need their ego stroked all the time. Or is our customer very laid back, very accommodating? They just want you to they want you to speak, good English, or, use the grammar very well and have great etiquette. They're just simple people. They're not, full of themselves. They're not self-centered. They're very easygoing, but they love great service. So devising that persona, developing those process models. How are you going to track? And then also looking at it from a benchmarking perspective. Which benchmarks are you going to use? Where are you going to get those numbers from? Which websites or social network sites, if any, or are you going to develop your own in-house surveys, and how are you going to distribute those and to whom? So you have to look at those. Branding yourself with what particular logos so that people recognize your organization. Great documentation that comes out of the process model. We're documenting how we're going to operate, our standard operating procedures. That's going to be a big one. You should have manuals on how we're going to conduct ourselves internally, because remember, even though the internal documents such as your sexual harassment documents, or maybe your diversity training or diversity manual or whatever, all of those internal documents, you may not see them as consumer experience, but that spills over, because if you have a toxic internal environment, it's going to spill over, and the customer is eventually going to see it, because they're going to see either the turnover rate in your company is high, and therefore they're always dealing with some new person that isn't trained up, and it takes them a while to get ramped up. And your customer has to, depending upon what the persona of that customer, if they're not a easygoing or a patient person, the customer is going to see it, because they're always dealing with someone new, because your organization is so toxic that you can't keep people. Or you're going to just have disgruntled employees because they're dealing with sexual harassment or some type of discrimination in the workplace, or just some type of bad management, and it's spilling over, and they're frustrated, and their frustration is going to show on the consumer end. So that's why your documentation and your core values in the execution and reinforcement of those values is important. And then also SKU management, and your SKUs are just your stock units, your stock keeping units. So you want to ensure that, are we tracking, our products and services? How are we managing our products and services? So you always want to do those within an organization. So saying that, good processes can be created by doing the following. Invest time and resources in developing a sound business vision. Measure twice, cut once. And this includes, but it's not limited to, your vision, scope, structure, and culture. Identify, introduce, and reinforce key virtues into your business environment. Right size your organization as necessary. And then you want to understand all segments of a business are fluid and should be revisited routinely. So your organizational errors and omissions should be kept to a minimum. This isn't a one time when you're going through this process And all of this isn't a one-time assessment of your business and then you go into production and you don't revisit it ever. You should be revisiting your organizational processes on a routine basis, whether that be weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, annually. It's up to your organization. That is subjective. It's up to your organization, but you should be revisiting it routinely so that you're implementing new techniques or always making sure that you're running your business efficiently. You want to establish those metrics for benchmarking customer experience effectiveness. You want to, if you're partnering with other organizations, you want to create service level agreements that reinforce your processes and that align with your processes. And you want to welcome and encourage diverse perspectives within your organization. Don't just listen to the suits. You want to also listen to the people that are in the trenches, the people who are actually probably running your brick and mortar shop, if this is a brick and mortar business, or the people actually running your website, the people who are actually packaging up and shipping your products, or the people who are actually accepting in the returns, because they're probably hearing everything. They have boots on the ground. They're in the trenches. So you don't just want to sit there and at an executive level and just make decisions. You want to get that feedback from your business, not only from your customers, but from your employees as well. And to kind of end this section, I wanted to run through just quickly to show you why the process domain and your processes are very important. I'm going to talk about two case studies. First, I'm going to talk about the Facebook case study. And this is just an article. It was an article written by Himant Tehana. I hope I say their name correct. And it was called "The Era of Move Fast and Break Things is Over." And this was in the Harvard Business Review. And I got this from their website, and the link should be here on this page. So you can go to that. But I just want to read this quote rather quickly, and then I'll give you some background on it, just in case if you're not familiar with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica debacle, which I'll say. And this is a quote from Tanea Himant. And it was, "Many of today's entrepreneurs live by Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg's now famous motto, move fast and break things. Zuckerberg intended for this to inform internal design and management processes, but it aptly captures how entrepreneurs regard disruption. More is always better. We race to put our products into consumers' hands as fast as possible without regard for the merit of and rationale for offline systems of governance. This is increasingly untenable." So basically what he's saying is, if you're not familiar with the move fast and break things, there's a book out there on move fast and break things. And this is kind of spurred on by the internet age. And if you've noticed, if you've been around long enough that you remember life before the internet and you know life after the internet, you know that, before things weren't instantaneous. Your news wasn't instantaneous. I mean, it was relatively quick, because of course we had cable television. You have your cable news networks and so forth. But now today, information is even faster. Products and services are faster. People want information and products now. They don't want to wait. And so the whole IT, and I'm not just trying to put this on Mark Zuckerberg, but a lot of young IT companies have adopted this move fast and break things. They're like, we don't really want to sit there and analyze, and sit there and get an analysis paralysis about is the product, and overanalyze the product and, kind of put all of this thought into it. We just want to release things to the public. We'll release it. The public will interact with it. That's kind of a minimum viable product. They call it an MVP, where you just build something that's just good enough to go to market. You throw it out there, let the public interact with it, and then the public will, provide you with all of this instantaneous feedback. You're monitoring the universe or the web for the feedback for this product, and then based on their feedback, you go and you make your updates. And this is kind of what a lot of IT companies are doing there, because you're competing with also other IT products and services. So people are just throwing products out there as fast as possible. And they're not looking at, and they're not spending a lot of time on looking at the scope of the repercussions of that. And it got Facebook in trouble because they got hooked up with this Cambridge Analytica organization. And just as far as for the whole 2016 presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and you had the Russian tampering with the elections, and then I guess they were posting all of these fake news articles on, the Facebook website. Now, we're not going to talk about, whether, the Republicans are right or Republicans are wrong, Democrats are right, Democrats are wrong. The focus here is that you have this company who's not vetting the information that they're getting. And as a result, this whole thing came out about Facebook and just the reliability of their services. That's really what I'm trying to get to. And that's really what this article is about, because now a lot of these companies, they're moving fast and trying to be big disruptors and breaking things and just putting out products, as opposed to kind of doing a lot more, should I say, quality assurance around the products, that these products are coming out and they're having some impactful effects. So you have a lot of people mad at Facebook, and Facebook actually suffered as far as usage, and as far as stock price too. The company went down. They had a lot of people gave it negative consumer experiences and moved to different platforms because they lost faith. They lost trust in the company because the company couldn't track or tell who was using their products or services, and who just had bots coming to their website and creating these fictitious page and putting out fictitious information that kind of created a little tear within the fabric of Americans in regards to their politics. And that's basically what this is about. And that just goes to show you that from a process level, when you have people that want to move fast and break things, as opposed to kind of really wanting to look at and kind of taking some time to analyze some of the stuff that you're putting out before you put a product out, or continuously monitor your product or service, you can wind up in this type of situation. That's one. The second one I think a lot of people should be familiar with, has kind of gone away now, and that is just the Wells Fargo situation, where Wells Fargo, and it started, they created a company culture. If most people aren't familiar with this, if there was a executive pressure or management pressure, I don't know how high up, I do believe it went up to the executive level, but when I say executives, I'm talking about vice presidents, senior vice presidents, CEO, so forth. It could have reached that level. I don't know. But apparently the workers, the people who are responsible for creating bank accounts, financial accounts for customers, they felt pressured by the organization to create accounts. They had to hit benchmarks, pretty much like a sales environment, where they had to encourage customers to create so many accounts per day, I do believe, that they just started creating they started creating additional bank accounts for customers without the customer's consent. So the customers had all of these charge fees for these new accounts that were created, and they had all of these different bank accounts. And the organization, eventually it caught up and it made the news. And this is not where you want to be. You never want to make the news negatively as an organization. And these were the numbers that actually came from this. So 1.5 million customers were impacted from this. And this is coming from the Consumerist that I got this information from. And you can go to the website and you can look it up. So this, they created $185 million. That was the fine that Wells Fargo had to pay for pushing their employees to increase their sales numbers by opening unauthorized accounts. $142 million was the class action settlement compensation that they paid out. They paid out, I think, over $6 million. That was the amount of money that they had to refund and credit to customers who incurred those fees and charges. And here we have a quote from one of the employees, which is I'm providing here 5, and that was there would be, and this is a quote from one of the former employees at Wells Fargo. They said there would be days where we would open 5 checking accounts unauthorized for friends and family just to go home early. And then 3.5 million, that's the estimated number of so-called fake accounts created by Wells Fargo staff for customers who didn't authorize their creation. So you can see from this, and Wells Fargo's stock took a hit as well when it happened, and it's actually coming back because, time heals all wounds in some cases, and in most cases. And Wells Fargo is a big company, but sometimes you don't want to create an environment where it forces your employees to do things. And again, I'm bringing you this information because both the cases, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, as well as the Wells Fargo scandal, these are consumer experience impacts, and big ones too. I mean, negative impacts to consumer experience that were all predicated from the process domain. It all stemmed from how the executives decided to steer the organization. And that's where I'm going. And that's why I wanted to spend so much time in the process domain, because it is very important, because it establishes the foundation for your customer service. When you have your employees going out interacting with customers, it establishes what type of product you're going to make, whether you're going to make a quality product or not. And it establishes the perception of your organization. And that's what I want to kind of convey. So the process is the foundation of any organization, and it establishes the foundation for what type of customer experience the organization will elicit. Process is established at the managerial level of the organization. And again, like I said before, you want to get the input from your relevant organizational roles, because they should be involved. And process is evolving. Again, like I said, routinely you want to revisit your process, and you want to update and right size it accordingly. And finally, you want to complete and correct analysis, development, and documentation of processes. It's not instantaneous. So this process takes months to complete. It could take months. It could take days if you're a small organization, but it could take months to establish a complete and correct analysis. So you could spend months devising, and I'm not trying to say don't release a product in the interim. That's up to your organization. I can't tell you to do that or not. But what I can say is ensure that you spend time thinking about how your management approach, how it pertains to consumer experience. Because when you're going through your process, you're not just sitting up there saying, well, what kind of shop, we're going to set up, and, this is going to be out. No, you want to think about, how does this impact? How is everything that we're doing at an executive level? How does this impact the consumer? How does this impact their experience? And if you kind of follow some of the techniques that we've laid out here, you're going through you're placing emphasis on benchmarking, you're placing emphasis on personification, you're doing your modeling and your risk analysis, and you're keeping your consumer in mind, and you have a target consumer. You understand who your target consumer is and who the interlopers are. You do all this, you can identify and at least capture good data in regards to what your consumer metrics are as far as your consumer experience feedback.